Welcome to the Church Leaders Podcast, where we're helping you lead better every day. And now, here's your host.
Welcome to the Church Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Day, and we have a great episode this week with an amazing man of God whom you all likely know, Matt Redman. Matt began his ministry as a worship pastor at a local church, and he has been inviting us to step into deeper worship for many years through his songwriting with songs like The Heart of Worship and 10,000 Reasons. Matt has won multiple Grammys. He's written songs that millions sing in churches across the globe, but his heart is all about glorifying God and leading others into reverent and powerful times of worship. On this week's episode, Matt and I discuss the dynamics of ministry leadership and what is important when it comes to lead pastors and worship pastors working together. Matt shares how worship in the local church has changed over the past 2 decades, including some warnings every church leader should consider when it comes to worship. He is such a great guy, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy this episode. So won't you please join me in my conversation with Matt Redman. Matt, blessings, my friend. Welcome to the Church Leaders Podcast.
Thank you.
Hey, I want to take it back to the very beginning. Let us look to how you first began leading worship in a local church. And I think it was St. Andrew's. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Wow, you've done your research.
Yes. Now, how did you begin as a worship leader, and what were those initial years like for you?
I was in a really cool church because young people were really encouraged to get involved, but also to enter into some kind of leadership from an early age. And you know, the pastor, the vicar, we call him, a guy called Bishop David Pitches, he was like that. But also my youth leader, a guy called Mike Pilavacci, was like that too. They very much let you run with things and wanted you to get involved. And so from the age of 13, my youth leader was encouraging me to lead worship. He found out I was playing guitar at home, and I've been playing some of these worship songs at home. And I had no ambition at all to lead in church. In fact, I definitely didn't want to do that. I just wanted to play these songs at home. But after a while of a mixture of begging, coercing, manipulating, all those great discipleship tools, he got me to lead worship. And I really didn't want to, but when I did it, I loved it. I loved leading. I loved seeing people responding to God through music. And I love that sense of encounter that happens. And actually, I knew pretty early on I really want to take this seriously. But like I say, I was in a wonderful environment where you were encouraged to thrive. And what I realized, looking back, man, they threw me in the deep end so often. And I was so young. I was like 15 leading in this church and then traveling around. And if it went great, then I got the encouragement. If it went badly, they got the blame. Because they were like, people would be like, if it went badly, he's not old enough for that.
Right.
If it went good, they're great. So, and it was only when I got to about 19, 20, I realized, oh, I'm starting to shoulder the responsibility here. They're not taking a hit from me anymore. But it was a wonderful environment to grow up on. They really pushed me, they encouraged me, challenged me, discipled me. They would speak into like gifting, craft stuff, like learning guitar, or you could do this better musically, but also they would speak a lot into character, and just like, hey, when you did that, you lost people. And then when we spoke into it, you didn't respond that great. Or, one thing was, I remember I used to get quite angry with the people I was leading. If I was 16 and if they weren't worshiping as much as I felt I was, I'd start getting angry with them. Looking back, it seems really babyish, but it's not a very good shepherding, but I remember like them speaking into it. Hey, look, the reason you're the leader, because you've got the map. God's given you a gift. God's given you vision for this. If everyone was exactly where you are, there would be no point in having a leader. We wouldn't need one. But so there's going to be a frustration. They told me early on, like, you're going to get frustrated sometimes being the leader because God's given you a few steps ahead of everyone else so that you can lead them there. And that kind of stuff was really helpful. Even things like teaching me how to change culture over a long period of time. I remember my pastor saying to me, sometimes we overestimate what we can get changed in a few weeks and we underestimate what we can get changed in a few years. And he said, actually, sometimes to shepherd people, you can't go lightning pace, We want to take as many people with us as we can. We want to make church feel like home, so they're not just showing up and everything's changing every week. And so there was some real good pastoral guidance they gave me as to how to care for people, how to lead people in not just a strong way, but in a kind way too.
That's so good, Matt. And you were obviously blessed with some great leaders in your life early on. I mean, because just what you're sharing with us, I mean, that is solid wisdom that all of us as ministers need to be reminded of. So you were in just a great place with some great leadership.
Yes, and I wish I'd listened more.
We all do, right?
I was just, I wouldn't say I was cocky, but I was a teenager,
Right.
So, I mean, even stuff like my vicar used to say to me, "Hey, I want you to read this old hymn book. I want you to get into the old hymns." And I'd be like doing lip service, going, "Okay, yeah, Pastor," but in my heart, I was thinking, "Oh, you're just old. Like what? You don't understand young people." And of course, the older I got, I realized, man, he was giving me treasure.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I realized why he was getting me into that, for the depth and the sense of heritage and standing on the shoulders of those who came before. And the other thing was, I was in an environment where we had a lot going on. We had conferences at our church. We had these clergy retreats. We had these what we called faith sharing trips. We went out to other churches. And then this youth movement was growing up called Soul Survivor. So when I first started out full time there, I was leading worship like 15 times a week. And that was I wouldn't want to do that now. I've got 5 kids. But what an amazing opportunity to learn a vocabulary of songs, to sharpen myself musically, to learn how songs flow together, to have to, I didn't have time to prepare all those. So some of those had to be, on the cuff, off the cuff, just like spontaneous. Here we go. I don't know where we're going, but we'll get there. And actually, so I'm so grateful for those days. That I don't know if I put in 10,000 hours. They talk a lot about 10,000 hours being a good number to get good at something, right? But
right.
I don't know if it was that many, but I'm so grateful for that season. It says in Lamentations, I think, it's good for a man to bear the yoke while he's young. And I get that. There's a season where you're young, free, and single. You've got nothing but free time, and you can really give and really shoulder some workload in the church and learning your ministry and stuff.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, leading worship in the local church. And your situation, like you said, was a bit unique because your church had a lot of different events and conferences and worship gatherings happening aside from just, weekend worship. But can you talk to us a little bit about kind of focusing in on weekend worship gatherings?
Firstly, there was a good amount of relationship there, and I think that counts for a lot. And I always find the toughest thing for some worship leaders is there isn't really a great line of communication with the lead pastor. It might be on a slightly different page, or it might be there's just no relationship there. But, that's really tough. That can be frustrating. You can feel a little bit alone in it. I was in a very blessed situation where I had encouragement, I had feedback, and challenge as well as encouragement. But ultimately, I knew I was loved. I knew they wanted the best for me, and I think that counts for so much. And so that would mean actually we conversed a lot around planning stuff, but I had a tremendous amount of freedom in that as well. So they were. I think I was involved in the planning in a way that they could help shape me and help me do it well, but it wasn't like a control thing. Sometimes you can be in a situation where you're super involved, but really because this is a control issue, but it definitely wasn't that. And then after services, we would also have a lot of chance to feedback and kind of look through it all and debrief. After a while, we used to even do that Sunday night after, just go and hang out and talk through it. But what I didn't like about that was if it hadn't gone very well, I wouldn't want to go to bed depressed on a Sunday night. So I said, what, can we not have these times on a Sunday night? Because let's just go and hang and not talk about it. Because sometimes we get into all the minutiae and then sometimes it would be like, well, it didn't go very well. And, I wouldn't like to review it straight after. I needed like 24 hours. Maybe we'd do it on the Monday or something. But it was helpful to have the feedback and, learn early on like if you have a humble heart, you can receive that not as a personal criticism, but as constructive advice. And people, especially musicians, we get so sensitive and so, I mean, leading worship's a pretty sensitive thing to do in a lot of ways. You're putting yourself out there. There's people's emotions and spirits involved. And it's a kind of I don't know, you're opening yourself up. You're opening your heart up. So you can get easily hurt if you don't have a good approach to constructive criticism. You can, I mean, and that's the worst. That's the worst kind of people to work with, right?
Right.
So we would have a very frank, open conversations around the whole thing. And sometimes, and also what was cool is I was given chance to disagree. I wasn't being rebellious, but if I didn't disagree, I was in an environment where that it's okay to feedback that as well. And I knew they were in ultimate authority. So if they told me something and I didn't disagree, but they said, well, sorry, I'm still have that stance. I don't like that song, or don't want this person on the team, or that thing, then I knew ultimately I was under authority. But I kind of liked it that they were secure enough to let me give some pushback.
That's good. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that. A couple things you said. I think as you're talking about just then, that they gave you kind of that freedom to disagree and to voice your opinion. And also that they gave you the freedom as you're preparing and as you're planning, they weren't micromanaging you. And I think that all goes back to trust. You know, you had developed a sense of trust with your, you know, the vicar, the lead pastors, you know, the lead ministers. So they trusted you, you trusted them. You knew that they had your best interest in mind, and they were trying to help you become not only a better worship leader, but a more devoted Christ follower. And so that sense of trust, I think, is so very important when we're looking at our local churches and the relationships and the dynamics among our staff pastors and leaders, right?
Yeah, and I kind of liked that I had this sense that, you know, with my vicar, he knew that I was in that role and I was thinking about worship and worship music more than anyone else. And I was spending more time preparing than anyone else. I was reading about it. So he, like I say, it wasn't a control thing. He wanted my leadership. He wanted my input. And I think it's an interesting thing, because some of the worst leadership things are you don't let people flourish. You don't give people enough wiggle room and authority and everything within their area of expertise, because you want to keep a little lid and you want to be the expert on everything. It can be like that even in a worship team. You know, I have to learn to realize, okay, this guy's way better musician than me, so I need to lean into his wisdom, his judgment calls on some chord things or arrangement things. I need to give him freedom to express the leadership and the expertise God's put in him. It'd be very easy for me. It's my band, and we're singing mostly my songs. I'm the lead singer. It'd be very easy for me to think I'm going to make all the calls and all the judgment and steer everything. But I know I'd be losing out if I did that.
Yeah, and that I think that also speaks to, you know, in your example, you personally, but then also the ministry leaders who were around you as you were leading worship as a young man, as you were growing up, the idea of, you know, security. And I think as opposed to being insecure, right? And I think we in the church, you know, I've been in ministry 20 plus years and get to travel the country and talk to lots of pastors. And one of the things that I have seen, and you might be able to speak into this a bit, is that the times that you see those dynamics stressed or strained between, you know, pastors on staff together, ministry leaders on staff together, almost always can be traced back to someone feels insecure themselves. And so they you know, so they try to control something, or they try to keep their hands on things, and because it's almost, you know, that issue of insecurity. Talk to us a little bit about how, as a teenager initially, and as a young man and growing up in the church, how did you approach that idea of being secure in what God was calling you to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, honestly, I had it so good in terms of you know, there's like a scripture somewhere about, you know, you've had many teachers but not many fathers. And I always read that and think, man, that wasn't the case for me. I had a lot of people speaking in and affirming the call of God on my life. I always tell worship leaders, if God's affirming this call on your life, there'll be other people telling you. It won't just be you patting yourself on the back saying, I'm called to this. And your mum doesn't count too. You know, can't just be you and your mum saying you're meant to do it. it has to be other people. And I was very blessed to have that. So I don't think I struggled with a lot of insecurity. I felt like so many people who I looked up to were affirming me in that call. That was good. But your point is very interesting about, the little insecurities, and they can get magnified, can't they, under pressure? And then if the lines of relationship and communication aren't open, they can just fester.
Right.
The worship leader doesn't really know what the pastor thinks about him, doesn't really know if he thinks he's doing a good job, or because there's no feedback or there's no relating. And actually, even in church these days, it's gone so much from organism to organization that in an organization, you've got to fight for relationship. You've got to work extra hard to keep some of that stuff that was organic originally. You've got to keep it open and keep it working. And I think that's super important. I mean, as a little aside, something I've noticed a lot in a lot of churches, I've been around a lot of churches, all different types. I would say one of the key ingredients that's missing in some leadership teams and backstage and some worship teams is just kindness. Simple kindness. We were all very efficiency driven, productivity driven, get the job done, check all the boxes. And a lot of that stuff's great. It's great to work hard. It's great to be organized. It's great to be driven if it's, with the right heart and that. But I sometimes look around and think there's no kindness here. There's a paycheck going out and there's this and that, but it just lacks the kindness of Jesus. And I'm not doing a big judge thing. I want to learn myself in that area too. But sometimes I think this feels harsh. This isn't a good environment for creativity. This isn't a good environment for discipleship. There's no kindness.
That's a great observation. And when kindness is removed, everything becomes a bit mechanical.
Yeah. And I think, I always think as church and as team in the church, we've got to celebrate our distinctives, and our distinctives should be peaceful hearts, joyful hearts, a flow of kindness, all the fruit of the Spirit, right?
Right.
We should be being gracious and patient. And when I see the fruit of the Spirit missing, alarm bells go off.
Yeah. As you're saying that, it kind of takes me back to my early years in ministry. I began my ministry as a youth pastor. And right whenever I was beginning my ministry was around the time that you released The Heart of Worship. And kind of as you were talking about this kindness missing, it just took me back to The Heart of Worship and how that song was instrumental in my journey. The journey of the teens God had entrusted to me, my family as a whole, our church as a whole, and it really is that coming back to that that organic understanding that we can go through all these motions and we can organize, like you were saying, and put all the pieces together and get very efficient and very productive.
Yeah.
But if we're missing out on the actual heart of it all and who it is we're glorifying, then we're missing something very, very the key to it all.
Yeah, some of the main and plain stuff.
Right, exactly.
That has to be in the mix. Actually, even for young worship leaders starting out these days, you can be very driven. It can be a career.
Right.
It can be. When I started doing this, I didn't even think being a worship leader was a job, unless you played the organ.
Right.
So I can see how so much has changed, and there's a lot of great stuff in there. But there are those little blind spots, that we have to watch out for. Right.
That's good. Let's talk a little bit more about that. How have you seen worship in the local church change over the last couple decades?
I mean, some of the production stuff's amazing these days. Some is just so high level. I think the pluses of that, it's very welcoming to someone who's unchurched, feels relevant, feels creative, and there's a sense of excellence, which is never a bad thing when it comes to bringing our best to God. I think the downside of that would be that if we lent on that too heavily and thought that was what made it special, or that's what made what we had powerful. I think of Moses saying, God, don't send us without your presence, because, that what else will distinguish us?
Right.
And again, it's back to that thing of celebrating our distinctives. So for me, one of the distinctives of worship that makes it different from other forms of music gathered together in a room is the presence of God. I always talk about the people of God and the presence of God, pouring out the praises of God. There's a sense of encounter. We're not just singing to the ceiling. our songs are getting heard. And not only that, when you draw near to God, he draws near to you. So there's this beautiful dynamic that happens when the people of God worship together through music that I don't think is matched anywhere else on the face of the earth. Lots of places manage to fill a room with awesome music. So that's not our distinctive. We're just one in a crowd if we do that. Our distinctive is we're going to go and meet God together. And we're going to see that he's not a dead God. He's not a deaf God. He's not a mute God. He's not an inactive God. He's the living, breathing Spirit of God, who will work amongst us and move amongst us. And that's one of the things that I think we've got so great on the production stuff, but we must make sure that we're also going strong over not leaning too heavily into that and leaning on that distinctive of we're going to meet with God together. Another thing, I would say the musicality is exciting. There's different expressions. The level of recordings and stuff and playing in churches is so high. But at the same time, when you look at the actual depth of the lyrics, have we gone backwards? I think a lot of pastors might say we have. A lot might say, hey, it's really cool. These songs are sounding cool and relevant and creative, but then the content in them is a little flimsy. It's not really painting a high view of God. It's not really giving us a big picture of who he is, especially if you were to compare them with some of the hymns of the past, or more importantly, if you were to open your Bible and think, is this actually the same person, was singing about? And obviously one of the key things that we've got to fight for is reverence, because in our culture, everything else is going towards irreverence and, dumbing God down and, shrinking him down. But when it comes to worship, that can't happen. We have to be in awe. We have to have wonder and mystery and reverence in the mix. Again, because otherwise we're losing out. Because if you have a small, flimsy God who's domesticated, ordinary and normal, what good's that going to be when you face one of life's big challenges, or you find yourself in the middle of a crazy storm you can't control and it's confusing you? And, you want a big God in those moments. You want a God who's holy, 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 almighty, the one who spoke the stars into being, the one who's the creator of everything and the sustainer of everything and holding everything together. That's who you want to be worshiping in a time like that. So I think some great progress in some areas, probably some little warning signs in some of the others.
Right. No, that's good and that's helpful. Whenever you're talking about production and presence, those are two words that you kind of tossed out there. Obviously, you're saying we have to be careful that our production doesn't become more important than ushering in the presence of God and glorifying God. Can we talk a little bit, would you talk with us a little bit about this idea of spontaneous worship and how you've been able to kind of cultivate that in the congregations you've led?
Yes. What I love about spontaneity is it tells us we're in a conversation with a living, active God. I think there's a great place for liturgy and for planning, preparedness, and things being in order in worship. The Bible talks about that. But there's another side of it to go alongside all that kind of spontaneity, the outburst of the soul, the reflex, as you see the living God. That, and I love to teach congregations not just to sing the set songs, but to find their own songs sometimes. That can be a beautiful thing. It's in the Bible, sing and make music in your heart to God. And like I say, the really cool thing about it to me is it speaks of life. It speaks like we're not just worshiping a God we heard about thousands of years ago and what he did back then was cool. We're worshiping the living God. And when we have spontaneity in our worship, to me, it speaks loud and clear of that.
Amen. What suggestions might you give to pastors and worship leaders as they are, preparing and planning for their weekend worship gatherings? And kind of keeping in mind this idea of making space for spontaneous worship, or what does that really look like, and how could you help them think through that, I guess?
I mean, first thing to say, I'm a bit of a cheat on this because I do a lot of traveling around events, and I haven't been a worship pastor paid on a staff for a while. And that's the hardest job. When you're leading week in, week out, you got to bring a freshness.
Right.
You got to bring something new and shepherd people over a long period of time. That's the hardest thing. It's pretty easy to show up in a town and they know some of the songs, and there's some expectation in the room. But yeah, I think what I'd say about the spontaneous thing, number one, you've got to all be on board, including the pastor and the leadership. Otherwise you're just going to frustrate them when you're kind of trying to move in towards that. They kind of got to get that and approve that and want that too. And then when you do it, just usher it in gently. People told me once, it was my youth leader, if you want to boil a frog, you don't just throw it in a pan of boiling water. You put it in some cold water and you heat it up slowly.
Right.
Apparently the frog will stay in there. I always think, why can't you put the lid on? But that's not relevant to this. I guess that's like locking the doors of the church, maybe. But
right.
But it's like if you want change, sometimes you got to just do it slowly and surely, and shepherd people kindly, and so just bringing in a little bit, encourage people to sing out for a moment, or say, sometimes these songs give us voice to say what we want to say, but there's other times where they're not quite expressing everything that we want to express to God in a moment. So why don't you take a moment now with a whisper or a shout or a new song or a posture even, and just get real with God right now and sing out what you see, or just bring, let your reply to his revelation just come in a new way. And I don't know, you just give people a minute, and then maybe next time it's 2 minutes. That stuff can be lovely. I mean, it doesn't work everywhere, but it's kind of a beautiful thing when it happens.
Right. No, that's good. Thank you for that. Another thing that you'd mentioned was kind of depth of lyrics and making sure that we are, glorifying God in this sense of reverence and this sense of awe. And that's one of the things I've appreciated about your songwriting over the years. And in our congregations, we've shared those songs and celebrated those songs. It always seems to kind of usher us into that place. And so I definitely appreciate that. Can you tell us a little bit about, you just had a project that released last year, Glory Song. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and how that has, what were you most passionate about as you went into that? And what was God doing kind of in your own life as that came about?
Well, several things. In the Psalms, it says, make his praise glorious. And I love that because we make his praise joyful. We make it a lot of other things, but it's important that it's glorious, that it's full of glory. And I love the title Glory Song. We try to make a record. Obviously, there's lots of themes on there, but one of the recurring things is that reverential thing. And, at one point on the record, I sing out a prayer like, did we lose the awe of God? Where's all the reverence gone? God, restore the glory song. And it's just that thing of like, sometimes you see a picture of an open heaven, and the things that they're singing in there sometimes seems a lot weightier and more reverential than what we sometimes get around to singing. Now, for me, the beautiful thing is when you paint a picture of the holiness of God, his magnificence and grandeur, and then onto that you project the cross and the friendship of God and the Father heart of God. Then you've got this wonderful explosion going on in your soul. How can it be that one so high and holy would welcome someone like me in? So, that's the kind of approach I like to take. And so on this record, there's quite a few songs pointing in that direction. Another thing, though, that was really important to me this time around, I noticed I had a lot of worship leader friends in more kind of African-American majority churches, or that more kind of gospel music expression. And it felt like there's a lot of friendship here, but we don't actually partner together a lot. And I would say, actually, if you look at the American church, there's sometimes between some of those different streams, there's not a lot of enmity there, but there's not a lot of effort either. Like really making a concerted effort to join hands and minister together and do life together and work together. So on this one, I decided in the songwriting, I'm going to do that with some friends, Tasha Cobbs Leonard, a guy called Aaron Lindsay, who's like a gospel music legend, amazing musician and songwriter. And then in the singing, like Kiara Sheard came in, and gospel choir. Just in the whole thing, I felt like I've got a real heart to do this. And number one, relationally, I think it would be wonderful. Number two, could be a lovely expression of unity. Number three, I think it will be richer musically because of it. And then number four, even kind of sociologically or politically, I mean, look at America right now.
Right.
The theme of racism and division and disunity is really not very far from the surface. All it takes is one or two things in the news and it's right there again.
Right.
And I think in the church, I'm just a little Brit, so what do I know? But I reckon we could do a better job of just showing an example of what things could look like, and just making, like I say, a little bit more of an effort to understand different people's point of view, show some love,
right,
and join together more. And so that was the heart behind the record, and I'm really pleased with how it came out.
Yeah, so am I, by the way.
Cool.
Yeah, and I can see and sense that you're being intentional in that, and it was a beautiful thing. And so you had a pretty cool experience, you and the gospel choir at Capitol Records in LA.
Yeah.
You want to tell us about that?
Yes, we recorded most of the record there, and then when we were talking about acoustic videos,
right,
I think we pretty much, the label would, we run out of money, but I just mentioned it in this conversation of like, hey, where it'd be awesome to, I gave him a few scenarios we could do videos, but one of them was like, we probably couldn't do this right, but it would be awesome, wouldn't it? Sun's going down, Capitol rooftop, we recorded the record, we do it upstairs there in the open air. And it was actually the most beautiful night. They made it happen, and we had a wonderful team up there, a gospel choir, a couple of musicians looking over LA as the sun went down, just singing God's praise and praying for that city. And it was actually a very, very special little moment. So you can see those on YouTube. A song called One Day, When We All Get to Heaven. A song called Gracefully Broken. A song called Your Ways, which, by the way, the first opening few seconds is the American flag on the top of the Capitol building, and which I thought looked beautiful, but I've taken a lot of stick for that.
Yeah,
but some people thought that was a bit too political or something, I don't know. And then one other song as well, and you can figure out what that is because I can't remember.
Excellent. Yeah, it's yeah, you can go dig around.
Hallelujah.
What was it?
Hallelujah. It's called Greatest Hallelujah.
Yes, awesome, excellent. Yeah, I encourage our listeners to go on YouTube and check them out because it was pretty incredible. I mean, I didn't get to be there. You didn't invite me, but that's okay. Maybe next time. But I just watching, I was like, man, how awesome to be singing. Especially, I mean, there are lots of. I mean, we need to be singing over, and praising God and worshiping God over all of our cities. But LA is just one of those places in the world that just to be standing on top of the Capitol Records building and just praising God over the city, just phenomenal. So
and the funniest thing was we had people's drones coming up to have a look at what we were doing.
Oh wow,
that's crazy! You'd be singing and a little drone would pop up.
That's awesome.
Not sure how legal that was.
Right, exactly. Very cool, very cool. Now, awesome. Yeah, I want to encourage everyone to check out Glory Song. Unbelievable. If you haven't listened, check it out, and again on YouTube. But now Matt, you have something releasing with Passion coming up, correct?
Yeah. Passion got a new record coming out mid-February called Whole Heart. And I'm doing a version of the song Great Are You, Lord on there, which was a lovely moment at the Passion Gathering. Tens of thousands of college students together. It's always wonderful.
Right.
There's a ton of new Passion songs on there too. Crowder's on there. Torrin Wells. Yeah, it's going to be good one.
Excellent. So you definitely want to check that out as well as it releases. Matt, it's been so good to have you with us, and really thank you so much for your heart and your spirit and just speaking to the lives of pastors and ministry leaders. And if listeners want to connect with you, with your music, those types of things, there are some specific places where they could go?
Yeah, MattRedman.com. There's quite a lot of teaching resources on there for worship and a few free excerpts from some of the books I've written, some music and videos too. On Twitter, I'm Matt_Redman. On Instagram, Matt Redman Music.
Excellent. Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up because I know aside from being an incredible songwriter and worship leader, worship is one of those things that you've really, really dug into, not just standing in front of a congregation and leading them, but study and writing. And you've created some great resources, some great books on worship. And so, yeah, I really want to encourage our listeners to check that out.
They're all very, very small. Most of my books are about the size of one of John Eldridge's chapters or something.
Well, there you go. It's perfect.
Tiny.
That's perfect.
I run out of things to say.
Oh, very well, brother.
But here's the thing, right?
Yeah.
When you're a songwriter, you're trying to say things in the most concise way possible.
That's true.
But when you write a book, that's not a good plan.
Oh, that's funny. Excellent, brother. Well, again, I just want to thank you for being with us here on the Church Leaders Podcast. Thank you for making the time, and thank you for your ministry and how it's impacted our ministries as pastors around the world, brother.
Oh, thanks, man. Enjoyed it a lot. It's great speaking with you.
Yes, God bless you.
God bless.
I appreciate you taking the time to be with us on this week's episode. Every week, as we are putting the episodes together, we're thinking of you, our pastors and ministry leaders, and striving to provide insightful and inspiring interviews as you seek to grow as a kingdom leader. So we hope you're finding value from the Church Leaders Podcast, and if so, we'd certainly appreciate you taking a few moments to head over to iTunes and leave us a review. Your positive reviews and ratings help other church leaders more easily find our podcasts, so they too can benefit from these interviews. Again, we thank you in advance, and if you have any comments, any questions, suggestions, or ideas for guests, I would love to hear from you. You can send me an email to podcast@ChurchLeaders.com, or you can connect with me on Twitter. Finally, you can find this podcast as well as other great faith-based podcasts on the FaithPlay app. It's available for both Apple and Android, and so we encourage you to check that out as well. So until next time, this is Jason Day, encouraging you to love well and lead well.
You've been listening to the Church Leaders Podcast. For articles, videos, and free resources that will help you lead better every day, visit our website, ChurchLeaders.com. Thanks for listening.